Hello and welcome back to My Time with Lynn, episode 11. I'm very, very happy to have be joined by a great guest, an old friend, Mark. Welcome, Mark. How are you?
I am very good. Hello, everybody.
All right,
Hello, old friends.
this is exciting. We've had some fun experiences together, which we'll get into. Want to start with
Yeah.
this question from the very wonderful Joe Elkins. It says, ask Mark to tell the story of meeting us and joining, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I have my own I have my own strong and meaningful memories, but it'll be good to hear from him. I think
Oh man.
I think he may have one of the most interesting recruitment stories of us all. You can tell him that he doesn't need to sugarcoat anything. So we'll start with that
Yeah.
one if you can. And that's a little bit of a prompt there, but if you can start with that.
Joe, I was thinking about you today, actually. I was thinking about whether I should tell this story or not. And I think I have to tell this story. I actually have to. Uh, and it's okay. I've come to terms with it. So, one of the things I'm going to get into a little bit today, and it might be controversial to some people, um, but like if I had to think of one word to describe the 9 years that I was in the movement, the word would actually be gratitude. And that's controversial to some people. But the reality is that I I understand that a lot of people came out of the organization wounded in some way or another. And I won't say that I wasn't wounded in some ways, but I will say that I walked into the movement more wounded than I walked out. And I think that's a pretty unique story for people who've left. I don't think, I don't know if that was the common experience for everyone. And I think there's some unique aspects about my story and about the role that I played in the movement, which allowed me to be spared maybe some of the more painful and like heartbreaking ends that people had. So with that said, I think there was a couple of discussions recently about whether or not the movement is a cult or not. Um, I think one thing you have to, I think whenever people talk about this subject, I think what often gets lost is just how terribly uh, messed up and um, unhelpful society is outside. Like, what about all the things that are happening to the people who are not in this cult, let's just say, right? So like okay, you define it as a cult, fine. But like what I was experiencing as a college student was far more, I would say, treacherous and had more landmines, had more traumatic potential, had more like if you were to do like a choose your own adventure, like it had more bad endings than joining the movement by far. And and I didn't join the movement for the same reasons that a lot of other people did. I mean, some of it was subconscious, some of it is, you can do the psychoanalysis on it if you like, but um, I actually probably joined the movement largely because it was a safe place where I could heal. And and for the most part, I got the support I needed and I got the healing I needed and the maturing. And by the end of it, by the time I left, like I could say with confidence, like even my own family members, like they all attribute like huge growth, like personal growth to the fact that I was in the movement, including a brother of mine who was convinced I was in a cult for like, many years
Right.
and tried to convince my other family members that I was in a cult for years. Like when we look back at this, like it's kind of obvious that that's where I did the growing up, you know. I'm still growing up, but that's where I did a lot of growing up. And I might have grown up anyway. I might have I'm not saying I would be like a drug addict on the street or something like that if
Hmm.
I didn't join the movement, but that's one of the possibilities,
Sure.
um, among other things. So so before I get into the answering Joe's question, which I
Hmm.
love, um,
Yeah. It's awesome.
And I love you, Joe, because you were part of this story for sure. You were really part of it. Um, so I went to after high school, I went to art school. And I had basically zero criteria for choosing to go to art school, other than the fact that like I thought it would be easier. It was like in a warm climate in the South,
Hmm.
you know. It seemed like an interesting place. And according to the book that like, because you have like no criteria when you're 17, 18 years old. I mean, basically, I had taken a personality quiz, which said, okay, you're artistic. So I was like, okay, cool, I'm artistic. You know, I'm emotional. I get that.
Nice,
All right.
nice,
So I'll go
nice.
to an art school. And then I'm looking at art schools and this one, I was like, oh, I was looking at the statistics and it had like 60% female and 40% male.
Those are good odds.
And they showed pictures of the dorms, and the dorm had a swimming pool. I was like, oh, this is great. That was it. So I went to art school, and I had a lot of fun in art school. The first year was really good because I was living in the dorms, and we were doing a lot of like learning how to draw and learning how to paint. And so those things were actually great.
Hmm.
But after being there for a while, you really get into um the ethos of the art world, which is just batshit crazy. It's just art.
Hmm.
It's there's no structure to any thoughts. There's no rules. There's no foundations. There's no like when it comes to what am I here to express exactly? You get nothing. You either have something to express or you don't. And other than that, you're just cross-pollinating with all these other kids who are lost, most of them, and having these like, deep philosophical, very uneducated conversations at 5 in the morning, like stoned. And you're trying to figure out what reality is.
Hmm.
And speaking of being stoned, like when 9/11 happened, I was like you, I was a freshman in college. Um, it was it was like the first week after orientation.
Yep.
And um and the dorms that I was staying in, it was kind of like a reconstructed motel. So we
Okay.
actually had like outdoor entrances and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And uh I woke up in the morning and there was all these people like gathered around the dining hall and they were watching this TV. And I was like, what the hell is going on? Everything's so quiet. Everything's so strange on this campus. And I walked up and down a few times, like nobody was home. No one was in their dorms. So I went back to the cafeteria and it was like the planes hitting the buildings 9/11.
Yeah.
And it was the craziest thing.
Hmm.
And the response of all the kids in my dorm, or at least a group of us, was to like go back to this one guy's dorm. He was like a drug dealer
Hmm.
and go get high.
Sure.
And so that whole day I was stoned.
Hmm.
Like that was the response. That was the generational response.
Sure.
And trying to make sense of it, trying to figure out what was going on. I think a lot of millennials, a lot of the people in my generation, like we really thought we were kind of at the end of history. Like we wanted something exciting to happen. We
Hmm.
wanted there to be some cause that we could, join, this kind of like red badge of courage type of moment.
Sure.
And I remember just being like totally like rudderless, like a had no real sense of where to go.
Hmm.
Um, And so anyway, long story short, like that time in college, I mean, this guy, this drug dealer guy that I was telling you about
Hmm.
at the end of the hall, like just to give you some perspective, like that kid started out freshman year selling weed, and by the end of the year, like there were drug busts on the dorm, and like him and like all these other people who were kind of like this, they weren't really friends of mine, but they were people that I got weed from.
Sure.
They all got expelled. Like one of the girls was on mescaline or some evil drug, and she would like chewed out the entire inside of her cheek, and she had a hole in her cheek
Dang.
because she was so messed up.
Hmm.
And and so a reason I'm bringing this up is like the movement gets attacked or like all the maybe the things that they brushed under the carpet or the ways that certain people were treated and this was abusive or that was negligent. And when I was in art school, like we would hear rumors all the time about kids jumping off the balconies.
Sure.
And the controversy was that they were never reported in the newspapers
Oh wow.
because the school didn't want to publicize the fact that kids were jumping off balconies.
Hmm.
Now, I'll I'll play devil's advocate that some of that is because the kinds of kids that end up going to art school tend to be kids that have a lot of psychological problems.
Sure.
And I knew a number of kids. I was close friends with some kids that were bipolar and like and taking medications and things like that. But generally, my experience of art school was that it was an insane asylum in
Hmm.
large degree. Uh, and I was sort of infected with a lot of these ideas. I sent you something before we had the chat. Like there was a book, for example, like this book called Days of War, Nights of Love. Like,
Hmm.
or I think that's what it's called. And it's basically like an anarchist manifesto. And like that's the kind of like pamphleting that was going around.
Sure.
Like
I
people were
remember. I remember
talking
stuff like
about,
that.
yeah, it was this kind of like um firebomb things, like just this radical kind of like sexual kind of like pansexual drug infused like romanticizing things like homelessness and like eating out
Sure.
of the dumpsters of grocery stores and just this kind of like that's what was considered the move if you were against the establishment.
Sure.
And so anyway, I wasn't that far out, but I did end up, kind of degenerating a lot. And I stayed at this art school for a couple of years
Hmm.
and, degenerated more and more, like promiscuity and late nights and drugs and, nothing
Sure.
too hard, but like that life
Sure.
and feeling pretty crappy about myself, like feeling a lot of shame, a lot of um, lack of self-worth, a lot of like confusion about who I was.
Hmm.
And so I ended up dropping out of that school at some point and went back home to New Jersey. And then I ended up transferring into a very different environment. And this environment was let's say it's a top 50 school in the United States,
Hmm.
one of the most expensive private schools in the country,
Hmm.
absolute like Club Med of a place where the average students drive in a BMW. Like, I mean, my roommate when I transferred in, like owned, sailboats. Like, I mean,
Hmm.
it's just a very different type of
Right.
thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Number one football team in the country, like
Hmm.
Heisman Trophy winners, brats everywhere. And like
Hmm.
so I was against all of that.
Yeah.
And I went to this school with some crazy idea that I was going to, because my brother had graduated there and it was a very big film school. So I
Hmm.
thought, well, my brother graduated from this film school. I'll just go there and basically make contacts with his contacts and get into the film industry
Yeah.
somehow. And it was a fantasy. And so I went in as an art major at a school that at that time cost like $45,000 a year just for
Dang.
tuition. And that was back then.
Yeah.
Now it's like,
Yeah.
and one of like I was a middle class kid at best, trying to fit in with really, really rich kids,
Yeah. Hmm.
totally isolated, totally one of the most horrible social environments I've ever been in my life.
Sure.
Like superficial, backstabby, um, like elitist.
Sure.
Everybody just wanted to know, like, who's your family? Like, what do they do? Like,
Sure.
it was, pretentious. And like, I just was really, really struggling to make friends there and
Hmm.
fit in. And here I am. I'm from New Jersey, right? So I'm 3,000 miles away from home. I'm in California. I'm alone. The classes I had the first 2 semesters, I hadn't had a single teacher that I liked. Not one. Not
Mm.
one class that inspired me in any way.
Yeah.
Beautiful campus, and the classes were very hard. So I remember like I would spend most of my time in the library, like watching movies. I
Hmm.
would wander around the campus aimlessly. And then at night, I would go out and go to the parties and basically try to get laid.
Sure.
And this was life. And I was doing poorly in class. I was freaking out, uh, stressed out about what was happening in my life, like getting more and more. The only classes I really paid attention to were the art classes.
Hmm.
And um and I was really just starting to lose my mind a little bit
Hmm.
because all the other kids there, like I would go out on a Friday, Saturday night and you would just see like it was like an ocean of the, beautiful, young, attractive men, girls, boys, whatever, like walking up and down. And it was just a drunken fiesta every weekend. So like during the week, it was like study,
Hmm.
study, study, study. And the weekend it was like,
Yeah.
and so when we talk about like whether the movement was damaging, I mean, this is like state sanctioned terrorism against the youth. And like I just felt so abusive that
Hmm.
this whole people were paying so much money to experience this moral rot. And I was part of it because, you're when you're that age, you're kind of a slave to your senses. You don't know which way is up. You want what other people have, and so I remember one of the things that really formed me, and there were so many questions. There was so much cognitive dissonance going on inside me. I wanted to be part of a frat. I tried to join this architecture frat, and the only reason, like, I had nothing to do with architecture. It was an
Hmm.
art and architecture frat, but I was literally the only person that was in the art department
Hmm.
that was even trying to be in this frat. And I was just desperately trying to join something
Sure.
that had but I had nothing in common with these kids. I wanted community
Sure.
and I couldn't find it.
Hmm.
And there's just like there's no one to talk to. Like I probably could have gone to a guidance counselor or something and like, you go in and like they're filing their nails and they got like People magazine and they're like, "Oh, a student? Okay." And like they'll give you some
Sure. Yeah.
advice. Like
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Right.
So it's insane how a kid could just be like kind of fall through the cracks in these
Hmm.
institutions. I was a transfer student, so like I admit I didn't have any orientation at all.
Hmm.
Um, and and my brother had given me this book over the summer, which is ironic because this is the brother that was like worried that I was in a cult for years.
Yeah.
And it was Plato's Republic.
Hmm.
And I had read Plato's Republic, and I was like, why is this guy who was alive like 2,000 years ago? Like, why is he so much closer to me and where my heart, like something in my soul was saying, this is right. And you walked around the campus and you would see quotations from like these great thinkers.
Yeah.
There was like a philosophy building and they would have the quotes of all these great thinkers. And I was like, where are the people having that conversation?
Hmm. Right.
And there was a couple of things, I was a little bit influenced by conspiracies and things at the time. And uh, I wanted to believe that there was something more
Sure.
going on, that there was some explanation other than the main.
Hmm.
And I'd had some exposure to Alex Jones and some other things. Like I wasn't into it, but I'd been exposed to it.
Hmm.
And uh I do you remember the part in the Republic where they talk about the three different categories, the kind of bronze, silver, and gold?
Yep. Yep.
So in play, yeah,
We
just
we
for
we
the
talked we
viewers that
talked
don't
about it a
know.
lot. Yeah, we talked about it a lot in the movement.
Yeah. And I was really thinking about this noble lie idea
Hmm.
and the idea that the guardians or the golden souls, right, in this kind of caste system that Plato envisaged, that the golden souls had to be people that couldn't be corrupted, that
Hmm.
weren't they couldn't be seducible by things like material possessions and gold and luxury and sensuality.
Hmm.
And I really thought about that, and I was like, I wonder if everything that we see on Fox News is just a play. And maybe, you know, Bush and all the nonsense, all the insanity that I was seeing, maybe that is just a play, and maybe there's a group of people that are secretly running society who know what's up.
Sure.
But if I saw them, if I like, would I even recognize it if I saw it? And
Hmm.
that's kind of the idea that was going on in my mind.
Yeah.
Now, it's worth it. We can go for days just on the intro story, but like,
Sure.
but stop me if I'm just
No,
rambling too much.
it's a great story. No, it's resonating with me in a lot of ways too. So no, I'm enjoying it, and especially in relation to the last episode. So it's a really good counterpart, and no, I'm enjoying it. Please keep going.
I think we need to know the draw, though. We need to know the context, like the hopelessness and the meaninglessness and the purposelessness that a lot of these millennial kids like myself felt
Hmm.
after 9/11,
Hmm.
and just like what was the purpose of life? Like what why?
Hmm.
And I wasn't that political,
Hmm.
actually. It was never politics that I mean, I was political enough, like I was curious about history, but it wasn't
Hmm.
like I wasn't one of these people that wanted to get into politics. I mean, if you ask me now, I probably forget most of the things that were in a lot of these pamphlets that,
Sure.
you know,
Yeah.
what the Children of Satan or like BAE scandal, like you couldn't if I,
Hmm.
those details are in when you're out the other for me now
Sure.
because that's not what resonated with me.
Sure.
What I was looking for was a compass of what is a human being, what is truth, where can I find identity and purpose and meaning and inclusion and community in this world?
Hmm.
And it was a spiritual calling, actually. The way I look at it now, it was much more of a spiritual calling than anything else.
Hmm.
And to kind of make that point clearer, there was a moment I was on campus and I was feeling despair because I had had kind of a panic attack at some point, and I was failing this writing class because my teacher was like, she was like hardcore, man. Like no matter what you handed in, it wasn't good enough. Like I was getting B's on every paper, and I was experiencing the most like insane writer's block.
Hmm.
And I was sleep deprived, like up till 4 a.m. Too much caffeine. I don't know. I was struggling,
Sure.
and I'm sitting outside the library, and I had been basically agnostic for a long time. Like, uh, I would say throughout my teenage years and college years, very much agnostic
Hmm.
regarding religion. And I was writing in my notebook, and this is like the crazy like serendipity of it all. Is there a God? And at that moment, some kid comes up to me. Hey, have you thought about God at all today? I was like, what? It was the weirdest thing. Like I had one sentence written down in my notebook,
Yeah.
and that was it.
Wow.
And so I followed this. So anyway, this kid started engaging me in a conversation. He was some kind of a Christian. They do all these like missionary things on the campuses.
Sure.
And I started hanging around with these guys because, again, I'm like desperate for meaning, inclusions, open to different things.
Sure.
It ended up being a little too weird for me. It ended up not being the right fit. I think they were trying to kind of push me too soon, too fast with like, do you accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior? And I was like, I don't know. Like it
Sure.
was a little too much. But this is part of the cognitive dissonance now because you got
Hmm.
like the art school kind of thing, and then you have like the fundy kind of thing, and then you have like Plato in the background and the
Hmm.
political realities and like the fact that like I'm at this school in California, which is a pretty conservative school, and like nobody was doing anything regarding the political realities in the war. And like it was just like a total fantasy departure. It was like what you would imagine like, the parties in Hitler's bunker would have been like, just total debauchery, like
Sure.
all the time.
Hmm.
So I I mean I don't know. So then one day I'm on campus and I see this table with like a bunch of tattered signs,
Yep.
Dick Cheney is Satan or something.
Something. Yep.
And and the signs are like black and white and they're like taped together with spit and glue, and
Yeah.
the organizers are like, kind of like shabbily dressed,
Yep.
and then there's this guy, Joe,
Hmm.
and he's looking kind of preppy, like he kind of looks like he fits in, like
Sure.
a handsome guy, like good kind of posture and everything,
Mhm.
and like kind of like a dignified type of guy. And I was like, oh, let's see what these guys are doing. These clowns are doing. It
Yeah.
was just like, and the wildest thing happened. We ended up talking for like an hour and a half,
Hmm.
and we started talking about Plato. And I was like, this guy didn't just know of Plato.
Sure.
He knew like every dot. We talk. He's like he knew every part of the Republic. He knew
Hmm.
uh, other parts of Plato. He was tying it into Abraham Lincoln, and like
Hmm.
it was. I was like, what? Where? Who?
Yeah.
What the hell is going on here? And it wasn't just him. There were other people at the table too, and they were just as smart. And I was like, this is crazy. I'm at a top 50 school, and I haven't had a conversation like this the entire time.
Sure.
Not from a professor, not from a student. And I started thinking, this is like the image that came to mind. You know the Indiana Jones movie, The Last Crusade?
Hmm.
Yeah. So like if you don't know what the movie is, they're looking for the Holy Grail of
Yeah.
Christ.
Yeah.
And there's the scene at the end of the movie where like the bad guys, the Nazis or whatever, they're also trying to find the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
And the Nazis are there's like 1,000 cups, and
Yeah. Yeah.
most of them are like really opulent. They've got like gold and gems
Yep.
crusted on them, and so the Nazis mentality is it's got to be the nicest one. This
Sure.
is stupid, of course. Like, why would you ever think Jesus would drink from that? But
Hmm.
um, and so he reaches for it, and he shrivels up and dies instantly.
Hmm.
And then Indiana Jones, though, he's kind of got that, empathic resonance, and
Hmm.
he's like, no, it would be the simplest cup, and it ends
Hmm.
up being like this simple clay kind of cup, and he finds it
Yep.
because that's the humility of Christ.
Sure.
And I was thinking about that, and I was like, there's some reason why truth is appearing in this form.
Hmm.
And anyway, he got my contact. He was actually quite a good salesman because I had no money, and he managed to get $10 out of me. And I got the book, The Earth's Next 50 Years,
Okay.
which I didn't read for a while. I read that later on because it was
Hmm.
impossible to read.
It's thick. It's thick. Yeah, it's a thick book.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But I did read it cover to cover eventually.
Hmm.
Uh, and so he had invited me to a meeting. I flaked out, I think, on one or two of the meetings. I finally went to a meeting, and um, you know, again, the office was like cigarette stains on the ceiling,
Sure.
like I
Very
don't know
very
what kind of
homely.
animal piss stains like all over the carpets. Like pretty sure I saw dead roaches somewhere.
Hmm.
Um, like this horrible 70s-esque decor, like magazines that probably had mold growing on them,
Sure.
at the bottom of a stack of new pamphlets. So my initial, dingy lighting, my initial response walking into the office, oh, what the hell?
Yeah. Hmm.
But the crazy thing is that you went in there and there was this room with a bunch of fold-out chairs, and it was full. It's like standing room only
Hmm.
with kids mostly my age,
Hmm.
men, women, white, black, Asian, like every kind of kid
Sure.
you could talk of. And they were in there, and everyone was friendly. Everyone wanted to talk to me. Everyone was, I mean, some people were a little crazy.
Sure.
That was
Yep.
the vibe.
Yep.
But
Always.
everyone was so interesting.
Hmm.
Everyone was such a character. I forgot to tell you. Oh my God. I was picked up. Here's the crazy. They picked me up for the meeting because I didn't have a car, and the office was in a different part of Los Angeles.
Sure.
And there's this girl driving the car. Now the car had no upholstery.
Uh-huh.
It, like you know how like normally it was a Honda Civic, and normally the top of the Civic like has
A
like
little
some felt
carpet.
covering.
Yeah.
It was all taken off, and there was graffiti and like gang signs
Nice.
all over everything. And like the driver was, I had not met her yet.
Mm-hmm.
Her name starts with an S and ends with an Anna. And oh God, and she was so friendly and so funny and so like, and then there was this little Japanese girl who was super cool. Like everyone was so cool, but I'm driving in this car and apparently the car had been robbed like recently and they found it. So,
That's awesome.
but again, like the Christ Cup kind of metaphor, like it was the same
Sure.
thing. So back to the meeting, you get to the meeting and there's this guy Harley
Hmm.
he does a class and it was about the history of the labor committees or something. And I don't remember a damn thing about what he said. It was a lot about the boomer generation
Hmm.
and the degeneracy of the culture. And it was the most awesome class I had ever seen
Hmm.
in any subject by any teacher in real life.
Hmm.
The most moving, uh, like high level, engaging content.
Hmm.
And the craziest part of it was not his class, it was the response of all the people in the room. Like, we're hanging on every word.
Sure.
And I was like, what dimension is this? Because
Hmm.
I had just come from a school where if you raised your hand, people yelled at you.
Yeah.
They were like, what are you doing? What
Hmm.
are you doing? Is this going to be on the test? Like that's
Sure.
where I came from.
Sure.
And like it's so it was like an instant oh explosion in my brain. Like, what is going on?
Hmm.
Everything it was like an immediate sense of like everything I'd been taught up until now is a lie.
Mm.
And that's powerful stuff
Sure.
for anyone. Now I need to backtrack a little bit. Um, in art school, I had had a pretty wild experience. Uh, this is a few years earlier. I was taking a world religion class, and one of my favorite books of all time. Do you ever read Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse?
No, I have not.
Okay, so that book, I read that book in high school. It had a huge impact on me. It's about it's about basically a spiritual quest. It kind of has a lot of Buddhist and Hindu vibes. It was written by a existential German author, but it's a great introduction to kind of like that kind of meditative spiritual path.
Hmm.
It's a powerful book. And anyway, so that book had an impact on me. And then I took this world religions class. I'd never tried actually meditating before.
Mm.
But one day I was there in my house on camp, like off campus, and I was talking with one of my roommates, and we had this really deep conversation. And at a certain point, I just felt like every cell in my body was just vibrating in like the most like intense way. And I just excused myself. I was like, sorry, Alexis, like I'm going to bed.
Hmm.
And I went into a meditation that lasted for 18 hours.
Mm.
It was a crazy experience. And I I mean, for people who've never had these types of experience, like it turns out that it's not that uncommon.
Sure.
But for people who haven't had this type of experience, it might seem uh, hard to believe or odd. But I had experienced a lot of visions. Like it was like my whole life had kind of, I was able to sort of like witness like my life up until then. I'd come to peace with a lot of things. Like I was imagining, it was wild. I don't know. And in that period, I'd also had a lot of really powerful dreams. It was something was happening to me at that in that chapter of art school. I had come out of it like vowing to be celibate, like vowing to be vegetarian, like all these things. And I don't know where it came from.
Sure.
And of course, a few weeks later, I went back to my old, debaucherous ways and, being an art student.
Sure.
But that experience had always stuck with me. And so now we have to come back to because all this, okay, so then I told you I was hanging out with these Christians, and even though they didn't win me over completely, it all this was like the meta in the back of my mind. I had just come
Hmm.
back from my first meeting with the LaRouche organization, blew my mind,
Hmm.
and I had this friend. He was actually one of my only friends. And he was a really interesting kid, really smart kid. His name was Chris. And he knew a little bit about the secret societies on the campus, and I was so curious.
Yeah,
So this campus didn't have Skull and Bones, but they had a Skull and Daggers society,
sure.
and you had to be tapped, right?
Hmm.
And I kept thinking, like, I wonder if I'll get tapped, Like I had this kind of weird idea that like maybe it was all connected. Like maybe this LaRouche table and all that was somehow connected to like this idea of like a guardian, like
Hmm.
a guardian cast. It's kind of an oddball idea, but like one of the things about the noble lie is that you were being tested. Like this idea that there was some elite that would test whether or not you were truly honest, whether or not you truly cared about mankind, whether or
Hmm.
not you were truly noble. And it might have been a little bit schizophrenic to think that, but I kind of thought that at the time that like maybe something, because my whole idea of truth had been thrown out the window.
Hmm.
Maybe something like that was going on. So just imagine like not knowing which way is up.
Right.
And so so I was talking to this kid, Chris, one time, maybe 2 days after the meeting. And we were talking a little bit about Christianity. He was a Christian. And he had lent me a copy of his Bible. And I opened up the Bible. I had this weird impulse. I opened up the Bible. And the first thing I opened it up to was this sentence about the second coming of Christ.
Mm.
And at that moment, and again, I cannot explain it to you. It's
Hmm.
physiological. At that moment, I felt this vibration that I felt earlier in art school.
Hmm.
And I felt a finger right here, and it
Mm.
threw my head back into the air, and it was light.
Wow.
And my eyes just gushed. And
Wow.
it was physiologic. Like there
Hmm.
was no like reasoning to it. I hadn't done any drugs recently because I'd been hanging out with these Christians and they were starting to have an influence on me. It was a weird thing and extremely powerful thing.
Hmm.
And so as soon as my logical brain, or I shouldn't say logical, my illogical mind kicked in, it started to try to interpret this. And it came up with a kind of paranoid schizophrenic interpretation, which is that this must mean that I am the second coming of Christ, right? So it's like it tapped into like a art school narcissism, which I
Sure.
think most art school kids have.
Hmm.
That this must mean that I am the second coming of Christ. And so it led to this like delusional state that I was in. And it was so wild. Like I actually at some point I was like, well, I don't know anything about Christianity, so I'm gonna have to like I knew very little. I'm gonna
Hmm.
have to read the Bible now and like figure out what I'm supposed to do. And I was like,
Hmm.
well, I need to test this somehow. Like I need to heal someone,
Hmm.
right? If I'm really Jesus, maybe I'll go heal someone.
Nice.
And so I knew there was a guy in a wheelchair down the hall. And so I knocked on his door and I was like basically telling him like with like full conviction, pupils dilated like crazy,
The power of Mark
full
compels
conviction.
you.
This is
Wow.
a real story, man.
Yeah.
And uh, I'm knocking on the door and telling him like, hey, whatever his name was, like, I can heal you. I can heal you.
Yeah.
And he ended up calling campus security, of course. He didn't answer the door. And so campus security comes, and this is like big, like wonderful, like teddy bear of a guy, and he comes and he's like, man, what's going on with you? Like it was
Yeah.
he had the flashlight, he's checking my eyes. He's like,
Yep.
Have you taken anything, son? It was like this type of deal.
Hmm.
And I told him I was the second, I think I'm Jesus, and he was like, oh yeah. And he's like, why don't you go back to bed? And I was like, okay. And so I went
Yeah.
back to bed and and basically was meditating. And like, I started to get really afraid, like paranoid, like maybe someone's going to be out to get me now. Like they're
Hmm.
going to find out, like someone's going to know that like Jesus is back and like
Right.
the agents of Satan are going to come and try to take me out. Like all these like weird Hollywood kind of matrixy type of paranoia started to kick in.
Hmm.
And I'd never had an experience like this before. Like these two incidents are the only two incidents like this in my life.
Hmm.
And so, oh man, a day goes by, and at this point, I've told my roommates. They probably thought I was crazy. They also thought I was entertaining.
Hmm.
Um, they had called the resident assistant to come and like interview me and basically see how I was doing. And like basically, let me just say that all the people, my roommates, the security guard, the RA, nobody told me that maybe I was in a delusive state.
Sure.
And nobody told me maybe I should get help.
Sure.
Nobody directed me to anyone who could help.
Hmm.
What the hell is that, man?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it could have been worse, but like I mean, how safe is that?
Sure.
You have a kid that's basically in a, I don't know what kind of state, but like sort of
Some,
a temporary.
yeah, some kind of delusion. Something.
I
Yes.
I could have gone and done a Jeremiah Duggan and jumped in front of a car. Like I was in that kind
Hmm.
of state. So like, why wasn't somebody concerned about making sure that I was safe? And I'm sure that they took record of it. I mean, I don't know,
Yeah.
but at a certain point, I was scared and I didn't know who to call. And I was starting to come down from the fact that maybe I wasn't Jesus.
Hmm.
And I was like, I was kind of a mess. And so I called up Joe.
Hmm.
I called
Nice.
up Joe and I told him what I was going through. And he heard me out and he told me he Socratically, using the Socratic method, asked me questions that got me to understand that maybe this was just like a delusion, like a spell,
Sure.
right? And that it was okay, but it was like also it's not true. You're
Right.
not Jesus, right?
Right.
And he came to the campus with another guy whose name starts with an A and ends with a Ron. And that person was very freaked out to meet me,
Yeah.
very skeptical,
Yeah.
very untrusting. And I can imagine why, because I probably feel the same way if I ran into me in that circumstance now.
Sure.
But um, they talked me through because I had some weird idea. I had some weird idea. This is how crazy it was. I thought that if I was Jesus, oh, here's what it was. If I was Jesus, then LaRouche was maybe John the Baptist.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Sure. No, I totally.
Yeah, so anyway,
He's
it was a crazy thing.
preparing the path for you, for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah.
yeah. Because I was like, these ideas, like everything, like these are the people, these are going to be the people that like promote me. And so I mean, it's just it's a testimony to the power of the human mind that like when you delete something, when you delete this assumption of this is the way the world works, like the Matrix, basically,
Hmm.
um, something has to replace it and quickly.
Yeah.
Uh, and so it's very easy to kind of go into a trance state. It's very easy to go into a state where you are really, really confused.
Hmm.
Um, and so in an act of compassion and courage, I would say, uh, Joe and this uh, other friend of his, they
Hmm.
coached me through and basically got me to realize what was going on.
Hmm.
And they told me, stop reading the Bible for now. Like just just take a breather, like sleep.
Yeah.
That was their advice. Eat some food, sleep. We'll talk in a few days.
Hmm.
And that's amazing, man.
Yeah.
And so what it really boils down to is like when you're in a situation like that, who do you trust? And who's insane in
Hmm.
that circumstance? Society? I mean, obviously I was, but so the movement was not just a place that impressed me, it was a place where these were people that cared about others
Hmm.
enough. At least this particular organizer. I don't know. Actually, the truth is I don't think most organizers would do what he did.
Okay.
I think that was a standout thing. I think that was a unique quality of Joe. I think most organizers would be like, this is too risky.
Sure.
This guy is a liability, right?
Sure.
We can't have someone like that.
Hmm.
And to his credit, he was very cautious, but They allowed me to come back to a meeting. I begged to be allowed back to a meeting. I think
Nice.
there was something happened. I had to go back home because basically school wasn't working out. Like I dropped out after that. That was too extreme.
Yeah.
I dropped out of school. I went back to New Jersey. I had to have an operation. That's it. And so for 6 weeks, I was back in New Jersey. I talked to Joe on the phone
Hmm.
and I watched and listened to like tons of things from LPAC,
Yeah.
like on the LYM site, like um, classes by Phil and
Sure.
things like that.
Sure.
LaRouche speeches. That's when I read Earth's Next 50 Years. So there was some period of time when I was on my own and I was doing independent work
Hmm.
in New Jersey. And I don't remember how I ended up back in LA, but I ended up back in LA and they let me into a meeting
Hmm.
and there was a guy well, I could say his name now, Harley.
Yeah.
And I already said his name.
Yeah.
But he was very skeptical. He was not very thrilled that I was there.
Sure.
Uh thought again, this kid's gonna have an episode and who knows what's gonna happen.
Hmm.
And there was a member of the youth movement, a bright young man with dreadlocks, who was very good at science. We know
Hmm.
who he is.
Hmm.
And he basically insisted that if this guy Mark is going to be coming around, he's going to have to be put on a strict diet of nothing but science.
Sure.
And I was a notoriously bad math student,
Hmm.
um, like just hated math, afraid of math. And he pulled out like Al-Khwarizmi,
Hmm.
which is the founder, like the Arabic founder of algebra.
Sure.
And he had me work through this paper by Al-Khwarizmi and basically build three-dimensional constructions of Al-Khwarizmi,
Uh-huh.
which I did, and other pedagogical geometry things. And it was mainly like this diet. The purpose of this diet, he actually told me, don't read LaRouche right now. Like I don't want you to read Children of Satan. He told me explicitly,
Yeah.
not yet. He said, you're only going to do math if you're going to be here.
Nice.
And it was a way to kind of, and it was a good, I think it was a good call, actually.
Hmm.
You got to see if this person's crazy or not. And so I
Sure.
passed the test. And over time, I have a kind of personality that people tend to trust me, I guess.
Hmm.
So people were disarmed. I don't know. They let down their guard and realized like after I'd talked to a lot of people, like I wasn't giving off like too much crazy vibe.
Yeah.
And after doing a few deployments and things, like it wasn't long before I jumped in and moved in at the York House, um, and the rest is history.
Hmm.
So that's my crazy, crazy origin story.
That's awesome, man. I think Joe might be right. That might be the most unique origin story I've heard, or any kind of how someone joined. And it's funny too, because you and I worked together in different capacities for a decent length of time there on the East Coast. But I didn't know that background. So that's hilarious. I mean, it's to make light of it a little bit, but that's and it's in general, I love the overall thrust in your mindset with this. I think it's more towards my mindset about gratitude, about just being thankful for the whole thing. I think, I'm not going to go through the whole argument, but Leibniz's argument in the book called the Theodicy, not to be confused with Homer's The Odyssey, but Leibniz's Theodicy, Theodicy. And the discussion of, is this would be the best of all possible worlds, right? Um, I think to me that implies, and I'm like giving a total nutshell, what is the end result of this idea in that book is that to me cynicism is one of the closest things, maybe the closest thing to evil, to just a pure evil, like
Hmm.
you removing yourself from the universe and
Yeah.
because optimism and like making things the best is the best way, the best relationship humans have to the universe. But I think it also implies that gratitude is probably the closest thing to divinity, or to me, like being appreciative of being thankful, being like humble, just like appreciating everything you've been given and so I really love that, especially in relation to the last episode. Nothing, not that it was bad or anything like that. It was obviously one perspective, one slice, and now this is the other side of it too. And and Lewis in the discussion too was talking about things he was grateful for, things he learned,
Yeah.
and I think I feel the same way. there's obviously issues, right? I've talked about some of those throughout these episodes. Some negatives for
Hmm.
sure, some problems, structural things. But on the individual level, I think, and it's, as you mentioned, it's not everyone's experience. Some people had a really rough go
Yeah.
of it for sure. And that's no, of course, any kind of discredit to that, to the validity of their experience, because that's their experience. But I feel grateful for a lot of things I learned. I mean, on this,
Hmm.
not recommending people go there necessarily. It's a very niche subject, but on this same YouTube channel, you can find my earliest podcast was all about Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. It's like hours of me investigating Merchant of Venice, which there's no way I would have even really knew about that play, or
Yeah.
had developed any kind of my love for Shakespeare than because of the organization. And that's just, yeah. I had a similar experience with the Plato thing, kind of funny. But yeah, and I mentioned before in Seattle we had this little crack house, crack house office. It really looked like a crack house. It was like this industrial
The
park.
LA one, the LA one wasn't much better.
I know. I like your description. I forgot about the '70s stuff. That is funny. Yeah, that all the stains. It was so ratty.
Stains everywhere, like people cooking on like Bunsen burners or
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
like a camping with like a canister for it's crazy.
One of like those homeless steel barrels, like they're cooking. Not really, but I would, yeah. Spending time at just a community college, but also at Washington State University, and just getting the college life, experience, college experience, and then going to that contrast to going to this crack house, and these young people are passionately reading Plato on a Sunday and just debating it, and they're like ferociously debating it. I was like, this is what I was looking for. This is what I thought college should have been. It was
Yeah,
not. And
yeah.
some
I
people,
100% agree.
some members,
And some people may have had that college experience. I mean, I just might have gotten unlucky. I,
some
I think this second university especially was a really bad fit for me. It
sure,
was a really bad fit. Like,
sure,
yeah, yeah.
sure, yeah. Yeah. And even I've been to college since I didn't graduate when I joined, but I've gone through I'm on my third school now, for a couple degrees, and I still it's like the same thing. It's like 2001 all over again. Like, man, these students could care less. I think it's even worse now because it's like you can just use AI to write a paper. People are just phoning in. It's just like it's so disappointing. The teachers could care less either. They want those reviews on Rate My Professor or whatever. So it's I don't still my experience
Listen.
24
Can I
years
tell
later
you?
is the same. Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of it is that now we're inoculated from a lot of the degeneracy of the counterculture. I mean, this is the problem, and this is where I just want to say a few things. One is like, you know, cult or culture, and and for sure. And I don't know. I mean, there's some culty things. I think most members that are in the movement now would agree that there's culty things in the
Sure.
LaRouche movement. Like, I mean, when I was there, I remember towards the end, like it was like an open thing. Like, of course, there's things about this that are culty,
Hmm.
but I think there was also an idea that like you have to have a moat. You have to have something, some some tension between the organization culture and the outside culture to keep it protected.
Hmm.
And I don't know how much of that was necessary or not, but I think that there was always this air on the side of caution, protect the inner culture at all costs, even if it means doing some things that are actually destructive to the inside culture. Like,
Hmm.
but anyway, that's a separate thing. But what I was going to say is like when I went back to university so after I dropped out in 2014, I enrolled in a city college in California
Hmm.
and mostly just did like English class, English literature and drama classes. And I
Hmm.
had a wonderful experience
Yeah.
because I knew who I was. I knew what I was doing, what I wanted to get from the program. And
Hmm.
I was hanging out with kids that were 10 years younger than me, and I was fitting in fine because
Hmm.
I didn't have to I I wasn't needy in the way that I needed to figure out like I needed them to show me who I was or something
Hmm.
like that.
Sure.
And I just want to say again that like when I was in these theater programs, I made a lot of friends with, 20 to 25 year olds.
Hmm.
And it's it's sad that of the kids that I did these theater plays with, two of them are no longer with us. You know, kids are dying out there.
Yeah.
Good kids, they're
Hmm.
dying.
Mm.
Drug overdoses, suicide.
Sure.
And it's like, what the hell, man?
Yeah.
And you want to know why people are want to join a movement like this? Like,
Hmm.
we need this now.
Yeah.
What are we talking about? Like 50% of young people now are like facing like mental health issues,
Yeah.
like
Significant ones. Yeah.
uh, more than ever.
Hmm.
And I look, I think the curriculum, I think there was a lot of things in the movement that didn't need to be that way. You
Hmm.
didn't need to have like the false dichotomies. Like just because you read Plato doesn't mean you have to hate Aristotle. Just
Sure.
because you like you find that Kepler's work is profound and beautiful and a great way to explore the scientific method doesn't mean that like you have to like hate Newton and
Right.
say that anyone who agrees with Newton is like anti-science. Like these dichotomies don't necessarily have to be so strong and so fierce and so stubborn.
Sure.
But the reality is that whatever whatever was going on in LaRouche's brain, whether megalomania or this or that, he created a curriculum that's a good curriculum. I
Hmm.
mean, it is a good, solid curriculum. You could probably add other things to it. You could
Hmm.
probably substitute. You could probably make a lot of substitutions and it would be just as good.
Sure.
But basically, it's the best curriculum that I ever encountered anywhere.
Right.
And I think it would be extremely valuable to recreate that now, somewhere,
Hmm.
anywhere.
Sure.
Extremely valuable.
Hmm.
Uh, and again, you could add more to it. You could add Eastern culture. You could add like there's so much, but like we're this is maybe a plug a little bit for the kind of thing that I now think about a lot is that we're facing, AI and I think it may end up being the case that LaRouche was wrong about AI, that it actually can be more intelligent than humans in some respects, in ways
Sure.
that we didn't expect,
Sure.
right? And what kind of education is going to be more valuable in a post AGI artificial general intelligence world?
Hmm.
The education that's being taught right now in most universities, where it's just memorize the facts and pass the tests without any emotional connection and any real like passion or identification for what is true and what is real and what matters?
Hmm.
Or is it going to be an education system that's much more similar to the kinds of things that we worked on together with LaRouche, where I learned, I mean, maybe one of the most powerful things that I learned was that all truths appear in the form of a coincidence of opposites, of an irony or a paradox. Like that. Show me the machine that's going to get that.
Sure.
Even now, even in an AGI ASI, I think it's still the case that there's something special about the human species.
Hmm.
And what we did educationally, again, it could be expanded, it can be built up. I think there needs to be a lot more respect for individuals and emotions. And uh, uh, we did a lot of ego stripping and a lot of all kinds of things that were destructive.
Hmm.
But I don't know. I just think that if you take all the criticisms of the movement and you compare them to the criticisms that I have of society,
Sure.
I pick the movement.
Well, to your point, I wrote down this note, but yeah, a lot of an experience a lot of us had, right, is we're studying Plato, we're studying the science itself, right? And then we're going on these college campuses and hearing the responses from people at these, so-called elite institutions, and they have no clue what they think. They have no
Mm.
clue. They've studied nothing really on their own. They're taking their professors or their textbooks word for it. They not only can they not defend hardly anything, but they have no passion to do any of that, you know?
No
So
genuine curiosity in many cases.
yeah, so
Probably
you're
70, 80% have zero curiosity about the things they're learning and studying.
sure. So to that point, like that's and especially my view at the time, like, that's the cult. Like that's not to say we didn't have. problems with culty aspects for sure. And I mean, if Lewis and I are going to finish this thing, it's going to be like 8 more episodes. So like going down line by line, and it's interesting, and
Yeah,
it's
no, I
hard
know.
it's hard to argue, but for
And by
most
the way,
people,
Lewis, I love you, man. Like
yeah,
all you guys, like this is the thing, right? Ah,
100%.
love is the energy that unifies.
Hmm.
Love is the energy that brings things together. And the best thing that LaRouche did was to bring together this curriculum
Hmm.
that is a unification. It's a story that allows you to have a scaffold from which you can expand.
Hmm.
And for me, it's been that. I think the trouble is when you get into man, there's just so much. Like, how could you read Plato, who's probably the most famous phrase from Socrates is like, you know, that true knowledge is admitting that you don't know.
Sure,
How could you be a fan of Socrates and Plato if you walk around like a know-it-all all the time?
sure.
I know the answer to everything, everything that needs to be done. I know.
Hmm.
And this kind of egoism, there's a lot of egoism,
Sure.
and it's a limitation.
Hmm.
It's a flaw. Whenever things were doing the best in any local or in any situation, it was when people let the ego down and just talked.
Hmm.
And there were places and there were times and there were environments in my time in the movement where that was happening, and it was great.
Hmm.
So, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, it was too little, too late, you know.
Sure.
But
Yeah, different offices had different cultures for sure. Having had the opportunity to go around to, I think I went around to all but two of the offices in my
mm,
time, so I got to see some of it.
mm,
And certain offices would be dominated by individuals, and so you sort of have that coloring of it. But yeah, that actually leads me to what I was thinking about asking, which is, so you start in LA, um, and how long? When was that, and how long were you there? Because I'm curious about. I think I know part of why you came out east. And I think I was there. I can't remember who was there first. Because I think you and I went at like we kind of went back and forth a little bit, or I went back. But so t if you could tell me about that a little bit.
timelines are going to be tough a little bit.
Yeah,
I have somewhere in the universe probably exists two suitcases full of notebooks of everything. Like not just like most of it's not class notebooks, they're personal journals and things.
nice.
I wrote like prolifically in my journal. Probably a lot of it was just complaining about, not complaining, but just being melancholy.
Sure,
Um, yeah, but I mean, so if I could access those notebooks, which are probably in my brother's garage,
sure.
then I could tell you all the dates. I'll know
Yeah, yeah.
exactly where I was.
Nice.
But I think it's important. Okay, so get to your answer, and I'm going to take the long-winded approach again because I think this gets to an important reason for why I have a more positive story to tell. I have a lot of good qualities and I have some not so good qualities. I think you and I both probably fit into a category of people that were came out mostly unscathed. And it's because like my identity in the organization was auxiliary. It was a support, I was like a support person,
Okay.
not a leader. I was not a leader. And I avoided that kind of responsibility like the plague.
Mm.
Uh, and I probably wouldn't have been good at it anyway.
Okay.
My role from the beginning, the reason why Los Angeles was like paradise for me in the beginning, because I came in when in 2004-ish, no, 2005 probably. It was at the peak of recruitment.
Hmm.
This place was jam-packed,
Yep.
overpacked
Yep.
with young, excited people, some of which had been there for a few years, so they had veteran status,
Hmm.
some of which were just coming in, you know, right before me or right after me. So you were in like it was like being in Haight-Ashbury, during the hippie days or something. Like it was like
Hmm.
being at Woodstock. Like you were
Sure.
just there. That was it. I came into the height of the LaRouche movement.
Yep.
I mean, if I named the names of like it was like an all-star cast
100%.
of the best like, I mean, different leadership styles. We
Hmm.
had, I'll say first names,
Yeah,
and those will mean
sure.
something to a lot of people. But I mean, Sky, Cody, Quincy, Sam, like
Nick,
Leona, Shauna,
Anna.
Nick, Anna, like,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, I don't even know if Mike and Mihua were there at that time. Probably not yet. I think I'm confused if they were there at the time. But then, of course, people like Joe
Hmm.
also who
Hmm.
need to be listed in this because there were so many different kinds of leaders, people
Yep.
that were
Hmm.
amazing organizers, and then but maybe not, incredible at science. And then you had other people who were incredible at pedagogists and with the sciences, and you had people who were gifted with music, and you had so just the level.
Hmm.
I mean, I think even Jason, no, no, actually not Jason was there. He was in San Francisco. But yeah, the just the sheer caliber and level
Sure.
of
It was
of
unreal.
of the
It,
I like even now in my life, though just those people, I mean, you just don't meet people like that. You don't
and
meet people like them.
to have all of them in one place, and it was, shades of it in different locals too, right? But like to be there, because I was there, I spent, several months in LA on and off over the years, but like I was there around that time too, and like to be in that place with all those people, and you walk in, it's just people singing classical music, people doing hardcore science, people doing philosophical discussions, recruiting, is just all like teaching, like I, it's such a unique experience and such a unique time, you know?
And Phil and
Oh
Harley,
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
sure.
God, man, it was so awesome. And this is one of the things that's kind of heartbreaking about it is because you're like, those people together can do anything. And that was the feeling.
Hmm.
And I just want to say, like, I was skeptical of Lynn for a long time. Lynn and LaRouche was not really the reason I joined the movement. In fact, I probably would have been more comfortable joining it had it been someone else.
Sure.
Like, the first couple webcasts, I was like, "Well, I wasn't feeling it so much. Like there was like
Hmm.
this big angry picture of Dick Cheney on the screen for like, and I don't know, 40 minutes. And I was like, it felt like propaganda. Like it felt a little bit, I couldn't, because I'm an empath. I think that's the thing. Like
Hmm.
I relate to the world through emotions
Hmm.
and feelings. And I wasn't feeling this guy emotionally. Later on, I started to soften up to that. And I would see his genius in certain ways.
Hmm.
Um, but it wasn't all the time, even up until the end. Like I think I always had a skepticism and an arm's length. I was always afraid of him in some way. Like I
Hmm.
spent a lot of time at the dinner table in Windy Hill later, and he was always nice. Like he never said anything bad to me or made me feel uncomfortable or anything like this. But there was a sense of fear that, and for various reasons. But
Sure.
it was all these other people that made me feel like we could do anything.
Hmm.
Um, Yeah, sorry. So I forgot where I was going exactly, but
Yeah, no
what was the
worries.
original what was the original what was the original question?
How LA and then you came out east and just kind
Yeah,
of that
yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So I wanted to get to this thing about why I think I survived unscathed because my role was like mid-level. I was willing to organize. I brought in contacts. I talked to contacts. I woke up every day for the most part. I showed up at the choruses. I showed up at the classes. I was willing to give briefings in classes sometimes.
Hmm.
Um, I helped with some graphic design stuff. Like I was a generally like low maintenance guy. I didn't ask for a lot.
Hmm.
I wasn't overly ambitious. I didn't get into fights with people.
Yeah.
I supported the leadership. And so I think for all those reasons, I was a good kind of company man.
Hmm.
Uh, and but I didn't shine in any way. I didn't really take the reins on much. I wasn't exceptional in any area. Uh, and so like I think people that were newer members, or you can say like weaker members, or those people, like I spent time with them and worked with them and gave them support. And then I also had a relationship with the leadership. So I was a middle person.
Sure.
And I think, that's part of the reason why it didn't work for me so much later on.
Hmm.
So in the beginning, one of my Achilles heels, I'll just be honest about this, was that, and this is something that should be brought up too, because the gap between men and women. And we had, I don't know, what do you think the percentage was of male to female in Los Angeles or in the movement in general?
Probably 80-20 or lower. Actually, I don't
Yeah,
know.
80/20.
Different offices had different, but yeah, maybe as a rough estimate.
It's
Maybe.
probably more like 75. But yeah, anyway,
Okay.
it
Yeah.
was a disproportionate amount. And that had always been the case. And
Hmm.
I would, dude, yeah, I told you, I was like, kind of uh,
Man about
I like
town.
girls, man. I like
Yeah.
girls.
Sure.
Still do. You know,
Sure.
this is a thing. And it was really one of the challenges there was that you had like a vast army of eligible single men
Sure.
and not that many ladies around that. And the ladies you met were incredible,
Sure.
but there just weren't that many. And we had a pretty moral movement, so bed hopping was not encouraged at all. It's frowned
Sure.
on. And but in the beginning, it was fine because we were bringing around new people all the time, and
Yeah.
I didn't know everybody yet, and there was still like the game of musical chairs was on, and so there were still a lot of available women in the pool.
Hmm.
And so I was like, okay, I don't need to like have a girlfriend right now.
Hmm.
There's like hope though.
Sure.
And so as long as recruitment was happening, as long as there were still some available people, like I wasn't despairing about that. But
Hmm.
later on, it really became one of the main reasons why I ended up leaving.
Mm.
As you know, I think we talked about this a lot because you were with me towards the end.
Yeah.
Um, my trip out east, I don't even remember what precipitated it. They would never consider me for something like security detail. I would have been a horrible fit there. Um,
Okay. But to my memory, it was because, your film skills and your artistic
yeah,
skills, and that's what I think. Did you just join the editorial team? So 1932, it's kind of our flagship film, was 2008. I think it was June 2008, roughly.
yeah.
And you and I were definitely there on that. I will plug it real quick. If you in the audience want to see Mark come back and we do a like a producer's commentary on 1932, just put a comment or go to our new Substack. I'll link it in the description, and you can put a comment there. But I'm trying to convince them. I think it'd be a fun time. I'll invite the others. I don't know if they'll want to come, but anyway, that was 2008, and I can't remember. My memory is hazy because I went back and forth. I went to do 1932. Um, and the reasoning was, well, this guy is like resourceful and knows about FDR. So like, and they didn't really know that I knew that I'd sort of done film stuff before, Um, not really, just like hobby stuff. But I was a film buff. Um, and then and then afterwards, I was like, well, this isn't real work. The field work is the real work. So I got to go back to the field because that's my true passion. And so, but then I came back later to the editorial team. And I forget, I just, my timeline's all janky. I don't remember when you were there and if you stayed or what that was because we were then in the editorial team later, right?
Mhm.
But I think also before when we still lived in Leesburg, you know? So,
I,
yeah.
seriously, like a lot of the time that I spent on the East Coast was like walking into like a time warp. Um, the making of 1932 was a good experience,
Hmm.
but almost all of the rest of the times that I was on the East Coast was not, it was not a good fit for me.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, no, I think it was right around that time though. It
Hmm.
was maybe shortly before or at the moment of 1932. They knew they were going to be doing more video production. I had some experience. And really though, I mean, honestly, like the crux of my experience was just showing up in the basement one day and basically saying like, why are you guys using Flash to do that? You should be using Adobe Premiere or
Yeah.
like
Right.
basically just giving them software advice that today you could just like ask ChatGPT and it would tell you
Yeah.
like, but
Yeah. Yeah. Right. That's
yeah,
funny.
I didn't have that much. There was another guy whose name is Adam who, to his credit, I don't know how we didn't always get along that well, but he's probably one of the only people who really understood the internet. I
Hmm.
mean, he really understood the internet, and he
Sure.
understood what was required to have like a film studio and
Right.
a website. And there were other people who picked up on it too, but like I
Hmm.
don't think I don't think I was the person that you wanted on the scene to kind of decide what the future of the movement's video production is going to be. Like I had some sense, I might have helped them understand what kinds of cameras to use and a couple things like that. I was big on After Effects,
Hmm.
so I got them using After Effects. Actually, that was ended up being a pretty big animation program, I think, for everyone.
It was. Yeah, yeah, it was. Yeah, Adam was one of those. He's sort of like a prophet. And he was speaking of like John the Baptist. He was just like saying,
Yeah,
we need to be using the internet more. We need to leverage social media. He made a lot of recommendations that they didn't really follow to their
yeah.
um, mistake, really. And yeah, but he was a very interesting guy. Yeah.
Mhm.
But I remember my memory of you was like very creative, very willing, like very eager, always had like a smile and like always like always like wanting to laugh, always just like I'm looking for the humor in this thing and very like you said like auxiliary, like yeah, very supportive. Like what can we do to make this better, But it
Mhm.
was like yeah, moving out east, definitely from like LA when we're just talking about the sort of jubilant youth and just all like optimistic future oriented and all that and then fast forward to late late aughts, early teens, right, in East Coast. And now we're much more in touch with the old guard, like the older members of the organization. And there's just kind of like a stagnancy. They've been doing this stuff for like
Mhm.
decades and decades. And nothing against them, right? I've defended them many, many times, right? For someone to sacrifice decades of their life for a cause they believe in, that's worthy of credit, whether we disagree or not with whatever the specifics, who cares, right? Who cares in a certain sense. But yeah, then also like the nature of the work is different too, right? Because we're in our offices anyway, all young people. We're running the website, we're making film productions, we're doing like studio interviews, we're doing regular news broadcasts. So like what was that like for you? Or maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I honestly, I don't remember that much. I remember the 1932 project, and that was fun. Nick he was one of the main people running it, or he emerged
Sure.
as the person running it. And at the time, we had a really good relationship. A
Hmm.
lot of people didn't like Nick. He and I were pretty close actually. And yeah, he really took the reins on that for the most part.
100%.
Again, I think I played a role of more of like a backboard for a lot of things. Like I'm the person that will be like, ah, yeah, that really works, or I'm not too sure about this or whatever.
Hmm.
I had a few animation ideas that
Hmm.
I don't even remember which ones. To be honest with you, though, I think I'm the one that came up with the title
Really?
for 1932. Yeah,
Nice. That's awesome, man.
yeah.
That's
So
awesome.
that was
That's
cool.
really
That's a
cool.
stamp.
Yeah, no,
I
I
think I
didn't
made
know.
the title.
I believe it. I don't
Yeah,
remember who did, but that's great, dude. It's a great
and the
title.
cover, the CD cover, the whole thing.
That's right.
Um,
And I think didn't you do
yeah.
the title cards too for like the acts? I think you did that, didn't you? I think it
Oh
was
yeah,
you
sure. And
you
we
were
did some voice acting for it,
we
and
did. We
that
did.
was prolific.
Who did you
And
voice
then and
again?
I animated your whole FDR thing,
Yeah, 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 that was great. And we went we
Which Matt drew.
oh, that's I forgot about that. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know we had some arguments about the animation sequence. Um, but I think it's great. Like it comes off really
No, it was
really
cool.
cool.
It's like a storyboard, but it worked.
It worked for us. Yeah. No, that was to me, I love that experience. The five of us, just young dudes living in that house, like working in that small room for just 5 weeks.
I got the worst athlete's foot, man. You remember that?
That's right. That's right. I forgot about
I
that.
think one of the people who we mentioned so far, I won't say his name again, didn't clean the bath. He knew he had athlete's foot. He didn't clean the tub.
Oh,
And so I got it. And but we had to get this movie out. It was like one of those things like deadline, deadline, deadline.
yeah, yeah.
And so it was like a hot ass summer,
It was.
July in Virginia, humidity.
All those
And
computers in that room.
we're all sleep deprived. And like I went like two days wearing the same socks, not knowing that I had like this fungus exploding in my on my feet.
Yeah,
And by the end of those 2 days, like it like crawled all the way up my leg. It was like the worst.
that's right. I
Uh,
remember that. Yeah, yeah, that's really funny. Yeah, we would like stay up till like 7 in the morning and then go have our
mm.
dinner like at Denny's and then to crash for like 4 hours and then back to the yeah, like everyone wanted updates. It was like the whole movement is like, when is this coming out?
Oh
What's the
yeah,
what's the
yeah,
what's
yeah.
the
No, that was
status?
cool.
Yeah, it was great. And like and to this day, I mean, it still holds up. There's still some I don't know. It'd be fun to review. I haven't watched it in years, but
There's some pacing issues and
sure.
some stuff like that, but the content is great.
Sure, like
It's
for
still how many views does it have? It's definitely one of the highest viewed items
when
we
you
ever put out.
I think they took down the website counting, but last I ever looked back when I was still in, it was like a couple million views. So it was like, yeah, it was pretty
Which
cool.
is wild. Like people actually watch that.
Hmm.
It's amazing.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's a good production. I think it's still our flagship film or their flagship,
Mm.
our flagship. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it was one of the prouder moments for sure.
hmm
Yeah,
and
that was
that's
good. That was good.
yeah. Mm, sorry, I had a note. Anyway, kind of something you're saying earlier, but like the despair in the culture, and I guess we're going backwards, but
Mm.
like I brought up last episode about the U.S. had 3 periods of distance running, of like a distance running mania, right? The Depression, late 60s, early 70s, and after 9/11, right? And that's like one, there's just like such a not despair, but just like a frenetic energy and like what this is so beyond our control. The political world went really right wing. It went really like let's go with these wars and such. Which I brought up my take was like this is crazy, this is not a good idea. And but part of it was, and so there's two things. One is that at the same time, those same periods, there also was shifts for what we'd say like more degenerate activities, right?
Mm.
um yeah, the 30s was like that, the 60s definitely, and then the early 2000s as well. And that's sort of like, well, we don't have purpose anywhere else, and we can't even really think about world politics or the culture. So we're just gonna focus on ourselves, have fun, because that's like immediate, and you get that sort of like there's some reality there, right? Because you're finding something,
Yeah.
right? Sleep with somebody or drugs, what have you. But so there's such a despair, and yeah, I think it's really good you're pointing that out. And I think it's hard for an audience that wasn't, we were like the same age basically at that time, like in college, and like we should be the people that are looking for how are we going to shape the future of our country, the future of this world. But all of a sudden we're like, that's not possible. That's like whatever you think was going to happen, it's not going to be that at a minimum, right? So it's such a
Hmm.
shock. So for the movement to be, and I brought it before, like there wasn't any other game in town. There wasn't any other group that really had an idea. You had some Christian movements that like, oh, find faith, but that's just you could say is like a variation of the just focus on the self in a way, because it's and not to knock them, but we were the only one, and it wasn't that no political party really had a vision, right? I mean, I think we knew, I'm saying for myself at least, the path of the world was like, this is crazy. Neoconservatism makes no sense. Uh, it's just like laughably false, the claims they're
Yeah.
making. So that's not right.
Yeah.
And the opposition was just weak and cowardly. They didn't have any, like you saw, they were ran over for a decade or so, right?
Yeah, they haven't gotten any better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for yeah, I would agree. Uh, even worse,
Got
it's like
worse. Definitely worse.
historic lows. Um,
Mm.
speaking of
Definitely.
the early 20s, their approval ratings. But the um, but the movement was like a purpose. It's like they have an
Yeah.
idea. They have an idea about what to do. And maybe there's issues I disagree with, but like they're trying to figure it out. And the fact that as young people that are passionate and care and like they have these goals, I'm like, okay, this is kind of a no-brainer, To me, like, yeah, this is the only thing I should be doing. It's not even like in my mind that debatable. This is like the only if I'm
Yeah.
trying to be moral in this world, I'm trying to do something because I talked about it in my second interview with Chance, kind of like where I was coming from, of like before I even heard of the movement, I was like, I need to dedicate my life to helping the world. Similar messianic view, not as specific as you, but I think that's a lot of people in that age group that have that sort of thrust. Um, So when I
what
fa
have you learned since then in terms of this concept of helping humanity? Like what because I think for me, the movement, this is what I'm getting to about healing and growing and gaining a foothold at least on what reality is and values.
hmm
But now also realizing that like, oh, you don't really need the movement to have those values.
Sure.
You could have found those values in many ways, and
hmm
many people who've never heard of the movement have those values, or even better values sometimes,
Sure.
or whatever, different ones that are also viable, let's say, like
hmm
also on the side of the good.
Yeah.
And what do you think now about this question of the good or service or what humanity would benefit from?
Great question. I think Great question. So I think for me, I can be a little more like practical oriented, like what could I honestly do in X or Y situation to help? Um, this current project that we're in the middle of right now is sort of
Yeah,
my immediate goal because I think there's some value. I mean, who knows? Maybe it's only ever going to have a small audience, and that's okay. Um, reconnecting old graduated members is phenomenal for me, helping people process some of the
mhm,
people that have
mhm.
went through the more traumatic side of things.
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
getting like a lot of good feedback from it, and I've brought it before. Like I didn't know necessarily if I was doing it for the right reasons. I took a lot of time to think about it beforehand, but I'm like, maybe I'm just going to piss people off. Maybe it's just dredging up old stuff to no purpose, you know. But the response has been like 99% positive, which is a great sign. Um, I think it has utility for young people that are confused right now and that maybe don't have any clue what's going on in society because I think there's even less purpose, you could say. I don't
Yeah,
know, like modern politics being what it is, modern culture being what it is. It's hard, and like you brought up the indications of despair with the mental health and everything, and the age of despair in a sense. There's value in I think showing people the risks of groups, right? And I think there's
yeah,
applicability to all
yeah,
kinds of groups. But then
yeah.
my next project, and I think I don't know how long this will go. It might go for a very long time, which is cool. Like it's enjoyable. I love reconnecting.
There's a lot of members. So
There are,
if everyone gets a turn.
yeah. And then I know, sure. And then I brought it before, but I'm just starting to get more serious about the written side of this whole thing, which is a big multi-memoir. Check out the Substack for more on that. That's a little way to get into it. But then beyond that, I have an idea for a Shakespeare project, which I think has the potential to help people see how much better Shakespeare is than people realize, it's going to be
That's awesome.
a kind of advanced website with layers of annotation to show the depth in different ways, and I think that has applicability to the larger uh, ro- field of Western literature. That's my degrees are in Western literature because of the movement, 100% inspired by the movement, and I want to go back and
Yeah, yeah.
read all the classics, and I'm still doing that. So, but that's not really answering your question. Those are just a couple examples for me. But talking to people, I think it is that like I think you have people that still I think it's like kind of separating. I brought it up in the Chance interview that the dual myths of the hero's journey and the tragic collapse, which is not everyone's story. That's just a framework that so far people have told relayed to me that they find some utility in it. It's
Mhm.
just a framework I think about, but being able to distinguish, okay, like, yeah, if you've had negative experiences, what were those? They almost certainly weren't your fault, like I'm not as a blanket, right? Probably not. It's probably you had a shitty leader of your office, maybe, or you had a toxic culture, or what
Yeah,
a thousand things, and helping people break through from some of that, see, appreciate, and be grateful for your own contributions, which I'm really glad to bring this up again finding that gratitude. I do want to have a section in the book of like where are they now? Because it's phenomenal to see where people ended up and what they ended up. I mean, how many like PhDs people earn and advanced
yeah. I
degrees?
know,
Like
I know.
the graduates are like tend to be highly educated. Part of it's because like that stuff's easy for a lot of us, you know?
You
Um,
would think too that these are a lot of late starters. I mean, these are people who, they went back. Maybe they dropped out in their 30s, and then they're starting from scratch, or they're getting
sure.
their, And this is but it just goes to show you that when you have the platform,
Hmm.
like, let's say the mind infrastructure or the identity infrastructure, then you can achieve really amazing things.
Hmm.
So it's not too surprising to me.
100%. Yeah, and yeah, I do think people for and I don't know. As a percentage of the whole youth movement, I've talked to a very small number, but and that's just, the nature of people I was in touch with, etc. But it grows kind of every week. I get more and more people reaching out and such, which is it's great. It's great to reconnect it. But like seeing how people from their own perspective view it and view their own contribution, see like how they still want to contribute in some way, you know? And let me give you a we just mentioned it. I think you might appreciate. Are you a Lord of the Rings fan at all?
Sure.
Okay,
I
so
mean, the movies, yeah, I never read
sure,
I never got through the books, but yeah.
that's okay. Um, so for those people that are still processing some level of shame or guilt or some kind of frustrations from their experience. And this is a corny, it's somewhat self-centered, perhaps, image, but the scene in Return of the King when Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas go down under the mountain to talk to
Mm.
the ghost army. And
Mm.
this is an army that's been shamed for their actions in the real world. In my example, these aren't people that are shamed because of their own actions. They feel shame. They feel as though they are shamed because
Oh, yeah.
some people resent being forced to leave the movement for different
Mm.
reasons. Some people feel that they weren't good enough to stay in. So they feel if they left, they feel that they
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
were are inadequate. They're morally inadequate, right, etc. I don't think those things are true for the most part. Right? I don't know individual. No, I mean, yeah, in general, yeah. So to me, I'm just this project. I'll say, not me. This project is kind of like our call to action to them to reclaim their honor, which is internal. It's an
Mm.
internal honor. It's just helping them process it by engaging in this sort of battle. By serving one more thing, and which is
Yeah.
maybe this project to help people see the risks of this kind of group, or the risks to an individual, because it's hard. And we talked before, but when you leave, a lot of people maybe they'd already forsaken their friends and family, maybe they had rough relations there. They can't talk to them. They certainly can't talk to them necessarily about their experience because they're just not gonna. They're fundamentally not gonna get it because just a different universe
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And 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 because of a failed policy, they're not able to reach back to the people in the organization because usually they've been shunned. They've been cast out to the hinterlands, given the Ostrak, stripped naked, and said, "You're dead to us." There's a lot of that. So it's hard for them to process that. So that's I don't know, a little bit of an image, right? Reclaiming their true honor uh, for them heeding the call to action, doing their best for X number of years, sacrificing for a higher purpose, um, and then, maybe leaving in kind of a crappy process. So that's a little bit of an image. Yeah, I don't, yeah, at the risk of being self-centered or something, or even self-centered with respect to this project. But again, it's getting so much positive feedback that it's just an image, corny perhaps.
No, it's not. I think it's good. I personally, I haven't thought about, I've avoided, I think, I've become invisible in a lot of ways. And not just towards the movement in general. I mean, look, I ran off to Greece, I got married here. I rarely ever post on social media, and I probably talked to less than a handful of people from the movement since I dropped out.
Hmm.
So, and yet, um, it's one of those interesting ironies. In the movement, I couldn't get a relationship, but I had a community, and now I have a relationship, but I don't really have a community.
Mm.
Pretty isolated. And this is one of the things that I'm often kind of on the lookout for is like, where's there a community that provides that kind of sense um, of real like joyful exuberance about life, about
Hmm.
growth, about service to like a kind of selfless service, right? Because whatever you could say about the movement, I mean, people were not generally greedy. They were not generally selfish. I mean, there's some egos in there,
Sure.
but mostly it was driven by curiosity and by passion
Hmm.
and by a sense of wanting to find justice
Hmm.
for the world or creativity, wanting to build things again, wanting to find optimism and purpose. And like those are the kind of people I look for today.
Hmm.
And they're rare. So I want to continue to be one of those people and to realize that there's all those people that we were in the movement with. I mean, most of them they're still around, and most of them still have some of this in them.
Yeah.
And I would say my call out is because look, for me, most of the shame that I had more shame going into the movement than I did coming out.
Right.
But to the extent that I do carry some baggage, it's mostly the things I've done to others, not the things that were done to me.
Sure.
Um, and I'm a very overall agreeable person. One of my flaws is that I'm too much of a people pleaser
Sure.
and too much afraid of being rejected. And it actually ends up being a weapon that hurts others.
Hmm.
And one of the things that was really hard for me, and I just want to make this a point that, the split that happened around the time that the basement left, or, half the basement left,
Yeah.
that was devastating for me. I mean, it just was like a gut-wrenching heartbreak. Uh, because because that was what I knew LaRouche was getting older, that he was kind of, getting a little bit kind of crazy and,
Sure.
and just less effective.
Hmm.
But I still felt that there was potential
Hmm.
uh, in the future because we had this cadre, this leadership group, these people that I saw as like maybe we can kind of build something from the ashes.
Right.
And when that happened, it was so bad. We were in the middle of a campaign in San Francisco. We had a candidate, and that candidate left like
Right.
overnight.
Right.
And one of my best friends, who was his campaign manager, left like overnight, and
Right.
half the basement. And it was a big, big volcano.
Yeah.
And I was I don't know. I think I was heartbroken, but I was also bitter. I'd felt betrayed in some
Hmm.
ways. I wasn't angry that people left, but I was upset at the way they left,
Hmm.
and I felt betrayed by that. And I think I did some things, or I don't know. I think I said some things, or even thought some things about people that I don't think today. And
Sure.
so, if that's you, and you're hearing this, and you're part of that group that left, and you feel like hurt by something I did or said or a rumor of something, I ask for your forgiveness because I do feel bad about those things. I do regret uh, participating in the kind of groupthink aftermath of
Sure.
whatever,
Sure.
but also understand that, we were trying to figure out how to win at that
Hmm.
time. And I was trying to figure out how to resolve what reality was again, because like what happened to me when I first joined the movement, like it was kind of like two earths collide, what's true?
Hmm.
Who's right? Should I go or should I stay? And there was actually a day to make the story, give the story even more color. I don't know, it had to be like within a week of this big scandal erupting. I was
Hmm.
on my way to a deployment because this is the thing is like you still have to go out, you have to raise the money,
Sure.
you have to do it.
Yep.
Like
It doesn't
you
stop.
can't even have time with your emotions.
Yep.
Uh, and we're on our way to a deployment, and I was with a dear friend of mine who is really one of my favorite people in my life. His name is Michael. I know he's a controversial person. A lot of people maybe have different opinions, Um, I don't care. You know, he's one of the best friends I've ever had
Yeah.
and a mentor.
Hmm.
And we were driving to a deployment in San Francisco. And if you know, we had a house that was basically on Ocean Beach. It's like the western coast of San Francisco.
Hmm.
And uh, we had driven, basically, we were driving south. And so we had driven like the entire coastline of San Francisco southward from our house, which is like in the very northwest of the city.
Hmm.
Anyway, I hope you're understanding this geography. So,
Yeah.
so anyway, our house is here, and
Yeah.
we had driven like all the way down to here,
Yeah.
and this is all ocean. And so I'm like having this existential crisis, like, who am I? I don't even want to deploy. Like, what the hell am I going to tell people? Like, ah. And
Hmm.
so, you know, Mike stopped the car and he was like, why don't you walk home? And I was like, what do you mean? You throwing me out? He was like, I'm not throwing you out. I'm just giving you an idea. Like, maybe you want to walk home because a walk can really help you clear out your thoughts. And maybe you need that. And I was like, it was a beautiful day, perfect weather. And I was like, okay. And he was like, you know, you leave your bag here and take anything you need. And so I took my notebook and I walked, and it was probably like, I don't know, 8 miles more. And it took me the whole day.
Wow.
And I walked back to my house in San Francisco and I was crying and, you know, I was writing in my journal and like all those pages are just like full of tears and
Yeah.
just trying to figure it out. And so I just want people to know that like and maybe you feel guilty if you're one of those people who left, like maybe you feel guilty about that and you didn't hurt me. It's just the situation did,
Sure.
you know? And anyway, whoever you know, if you're out there in the world and you still have love in your heart and you still care about others and you care about humanity and you still have some curiosity left, then, you know, you're my people. And like you said, if you're cynical and defeated and you know you've turned on humanity and it's all a joke and you know
Yeah.
well then you know God bless you. Like I hope you come to something more positive in life. But uh, yeah, my message is, and if you're still in the fight, like I respect that. Like I admire it. I don't think I don't think the fight is exactly lost. Like this is the thing is I I realize that there are some people that are still in one of the remaining movements. I don't
Hmm.
really know what they're doing. I don't know what it's like. I don't know what the environment is. I don't know what they think of me talking right now. I don't know anything. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
But my message to those people is if you believe in what you're doing and you're having an effect and you're getting joy out of it still and you're finding meaning in it, if you're happy, then keep doing it.
Yeah. Sure.
But if you're, you know, if you're just out there in the jungle, like you mentioned last time, you know, the
Hmm.
after World War II, the Japanese
Yeah.
like guys that were
Yeah.
like in the jungle, like still fighting, and you know, if you're miserable, then I think one of the things I realized is like it's okay. You're not Atlas. Like you don't have to have the world on your shoulders. Like you know, whatever you believe in, there's redemption for there's atonement. There's you're not expected to save the world. If you can and you do, there's glory in it,
Hmm.
but you're not expected to save the world. Um, but you are expected to cherish and to cherish the human life, you know.
Sure.
Remember, remember the story of what was it? Universal History, the Schiller.
Sure. The Breadfit Scholar or the
Or what was the one? What was the Lycurgus and Solon? That's the one I'm thinking of.
there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, like do we have a state that serves the interest of the individual or the individual that serves the purpose of the state?
Hmm.
And I had always thought that the movement represented the Athenians,
Sure.
but sometimes, you know, it gets pretty Spartan.
Hmm.
And you know, these are questions, but I think this is my take on it, and I'm kind of at it, you know, going on, but my take is that uh nothing that was done is a failure. Like Yeah, certain things were failures. I do think that I do think that LaRouche had some problematic personality issues that I think it's one of these paradoxes of coincidence of opposites where had he not been the person he was, there may not have been a movement.
Sure.
Had he been even a slightly different, there might not have been a movement. But also because of the way he was, I think a lot of things didn't have the effect they could have, and a lot of blunders were made, and balls were dropped, and people were hurt, and so I do think that the all roads lead to one concept was a failed concept.
Hmm.
But if you look overall and you ask yourself, like, is this a movement that did more good than evil? No question, it did more good than evil.
Hmm.
And if you look at the world now, whether you like Trump or don't, whether you agree with what's happening or not, there's a change in the what was it? You used this word the other day. It's a good reminder, the zeitgeist.
Oh yeah.
Uh, there's a change in the zeitgeist, and I think a lot of the stuff that we were doing over all these years has made it into the mainstream in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
Um, in the long form podcast world, in just like you mentioned, Nawapa now is like
Hmm.
on the table in some way. Like there's a lot of things that weren't in discussion at all previously, and I think it's this non-infinitesimal, non-negligible response. And so the history, the wheels of history keep turning, and
Hmm.
it's impossible to measure, unfortunately, the effect, the long-term historic effects. But I see no reason why there couldn't be another youth movement. Like to me, that was the thing. I didn't care if LaRouche was president. I didn't care if someone won an election. I didn't care if Obama was impeached or any of
Hmm.
these kinds of things. I mean, it would have been nice, maybe. I'm not even sure that LaRouche would have been a good president. I think it could have been a real train wreck, to be honest with you.
Sure.
Because there's not enough openness, there's not enough compromise. Like it's just he probably wouldn't have made it very long, or it would
Hmm.
have been I don't know. But
Sure.
it that doesn't mean that he's not brilliant. It doesn't mean that these ideas don't have legs and that they won't one day. It's just funny how things history is complicated, right?
Hmm.
And I feel like we're entering this is my thing. I feel like AI is huge.
Hmm.
It's the big surprise that I did not see coming.
Hmm.
Uh, and what you described how do you call them, long distance runs or whatever?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Long distance running, like so, like marathons are greater.
I think we're facing one now. Look, I work
Hmm.
with a lot of kids that are, let's say, 10 to 18 age bracket, and they're all doing homework with AI now. Like it's a different world. They do not trust after COVID, they do not trust institutions, they don't trust their teachers. There's a
Sure,
lot of behavioral problems that are coming up.
sure.
Uh, One of the things that's starting to grow also is like school refusal. Like kids are just not, they don't go to school. They're like, no,
Hmm.
can't get me to go. Sorry, not going to
Wow,
go.
wow.
And that's a growing trend. And I feel like you're very soon people are going to be like, oh, 50% of the jobs are being taken by AI. All right. And you want me to go to school where do homework until 10:30 at night, studying like the most mind-deadening garbage you can imagine
Sure.
with teachers that don't care, that are burnt out and stressed out and never have a life of their own. Miserable people teaching miserable kids miserable
Hmm.
ideas for a miserable workforce that won't exist by the time you graduate. So, like, my sense is like these ideas are going to be needed. And I don't think I think the political fight is more this is one of the things that kind of sucked about the end for me. And the reason why it was like a long drawn out, like, end of the romance is that we got so sucked into fundraising and the daily, like just staying alive, fighting one more day, one more day, one more day, that we lost a lot of the spirit of, the the growth process, the education process, like, thank God we kept some of it alive with, the choruses and things, but it just got really hard. Like
Hmm.
the life got taken out of the booze in a real way for me. I don't know. I feel like the real future of the fight, and again, I do not know what people are doing now and what effect they're having,
Yeah.
but the real future of the fight is the Renaissance, and it's always been.
Hmm.
And like, you mentioned, I think Jordan Peterson, like there's some interesting things happening.
Sure.
He's got an academy, like there's
Hmm.
interesting things happening. And like those are things that you went to the Maha event, right?
Yep. Hmm.
Those are things
Sure.
I curious, interesting,
Hmm.
um, opportunity. And I think the youth element is again, it has to become a focus one day.
Hmm. That's a really interesting perspective. I actually went to that academy for a while.
You did?
It's an interesting
Did you
academy,
take
and
some of the classes?
I
Yeah.
did. And I'm a humanities field guy, of course. I was very curious about the idea, and it's relative to a lot of things you're saying, which is why I'm taking a moment to talk about it here. But their whole point is like, why are university education so crazy expensive? So much of it's admin overhead bloat, right? Which is crazy. Like the courses, like textbooks can be digital and like basically free. All the information is like on the internet. Why? Who are we paying
Mhm.
in for why? So his point was for a fraction of the cost. I think it's like 500 a year, or it might be more than that now. But for 500 a year, you get access to the greatest professors currently alive talking about the subjects they're most interested in discussing, and then you take a series of like online tests to prove to show that you understand what was said. There's really just a lecture test, but it's like that's a great idea, and if you, I mean, you could see it if you just, for instance, and not to like promote Jordan Peterson necessarily, but like if you watch his podcast, you get a sense of the subjects and the kind of people he brings on, right? Um, really interesting thinkers, experts in their field. So that's, yeah, to your point that it's one kind of approach to it, to the classical education piece. It's part of it. It's not the whole thing, whatever, but yeah, it is. It is interesting.
Well,
So
the problem with it is it's too consumer based. Like, I think this is the problem with podcasts in general. You listen to these 3 hour things and you're consuming ideas, but you're not really making discoveries, right?
sure.
And if I think about what younger generations would benefit most from, it's like this cadre school environment. Yeah, I mean, guess what? In a world of AI dominated intelligence, let's say, you still need to educate the youth. And what are you going to educate them? Well, you got to give them sense of universal principles because that's the thing.
Hmm.
That's the thing that's going to give them a compass
Sure.
of what's true. Because everything else, the facts, you can use your calculator to get the facts, like your AI.
Hmm.
But understanding, like, so I think it's going to be much more about wisdom than anything. And so,
Sure.
like, that's what's great about Kepler. I mean, Kepler, every kid in America should be working through the new astronomy and the harmonies of the world because it's this elegant marriage between science, art, philosophy, and spirituality
Hmm.
and music.
Yeah.
It's poetry. It speaks to the soul, the mind at the same time.
Hmm.
And that's why, I mean, to this day, like reading the harmonies of the world, like I spent 2 years on it as somebody who sucked at math and is not particularly good at music, uh, or rigorous. Like that's one of the greatest accomplishments of my life is working
Hmm.
through the harmonies of the world and the new astronomy.
Yeah.
Because it was a hard fight. It was a hard slog for me.
A long,
That was
yeah,
not in my.
a hard and long fight.
So I mean, I this is what I mean by gratitude. Like, and when I look at younger generations, I'm like, man, there's so much curiosity. There's so much. They're great kids,
Hmm.
but they are bored as fuck in school, man.
Yeah.
And they're looking. Come on, like they know so much more now because they have the internet. Like they're hearing a lot of things. They don't know what, but it's like Sky used to always say, uh, uh, "How do you know the difference between what's true and what's not?"
Hmm.
And that's what I think the diet that he put me on. when I was in a schizoid episode state,
Hmm.
that's the diet that half the generation needs to be put on, something like that.
Sure.
And I always felt like that, the thing that the real tragedy is not it, the tragedy is that we didn't have like a billionaire who could come in and give us $100 million to create a school.
Right.
Because if you had that group that existed in 2004 or five in Los Angeles, if you gave that group $100 million to build a school, the world is a different place.
Sure. Yeah,
And it's a
100%.
small amount of money.
Hmm.
It's a small amount of money, and it's just crazy.
Yeah.
But then, and if you could eliminate all the thought police kind of aspects of the movement like that, that could really be a powerful thing. And I don't know. Like you can keep people on a strict diet, but then you got to open it up at a certain point. And I think the movement wanted to do that. I think that was starting to happen. Like when I was in San Francisco, things were healing.
Hmm.
That's the funny thing is after the split and Lynn was old, things were healing.
Hmm.
Um, we were talking about things like we were there for each other. There was a lot of that. There was a lot more openness. The older generation was being brought together with the younger generation for the first time. People were
Hmm.
happier. Like it was a liberation in a lot of
Hmm.
ways. But I don't know how it is now. But that during that period, like, and I went back a year after I dropped out. I went back and it was fine. And
Hmm.
everyone was like friendly and happy. And I was like, I wasn't sure what to expect. And maybe I walked out the door and they're like, oh God, like he's gone. Finally, we can be ourselves again. But I really think, I don't know. It was not a toxic thing. It was loving. It was people were giving me hugs. And um I think it has to do it. And look, I have so much compassion for the people that had a hard exit because I had the luxury of watching a lot of people leave in painful ways.
Yeah.
And And I also know that the bigger you are, the harder you fall. And for a lot of people, they didn't have the luxury of slipping out slowly over the course of years.
Sure.
I left at a time when a lot of other people had left. And honestly, it was kind of like we're barely keeping the lights on, skeleton crew only.
Right.
Like you're either one of the Vikings, like, or you're not. Like we know that every person who remains needs to pull their weight and raise a certain amount every day and take on a certain amount of responsibility. And it's kind of like you're either willing to do that or you're not. And if you want to leave, it's fine.
Hmm.
And so I left at the perfect time in that sense, in terms
Sure.
of like reduction of trauma.
Sure.
Uh, I was I went out to the East Coast one last time to help out with the design of the website,
Hmm.
the new Drupal website, which is no longer existing, but fine.
Yeah.
Um, and I had a conversation with two people who, again, like, I mean, Bruce and someone named Barbara, who I think a lot of people have had bad runs with. I never had a bad run with those people at all. I mean,
Hmm.
definitely not Bruce. But even with Barbara, like, never one unfair thing interaction between me and her. So, and that's acknowledging that other people's experience may have been dramatically different than that.
Sure. Sure.
And uh, so again, it's all nuanced. And if you're in the movement, if you're not in the movement, just love mankind and love each other. Let some healing happen. Don't be so damn stubborn.
Hmm.
Don't be such a fucking idiot. Like everything is more possible when people come together. Uh, bygones, bygones. Like it's nuts.
Yeah. W- Very, very beautiful image. And I would say even maybe a good image to close on.
Yeah,
Unless
sure.
I don't want to cut it off. Like I'm really enjoying this discussion, and I'm getting sort of waves of memories of just about how great of a person you are, Mark. And my experience with you, um, you are just such a kind and thoughtful person. And often it would be like a little bit almost jarring in certain contexts, because sometimes we get like really like objective oriented and we gotta do this stuff, and then you're always kind of like over here, like, okay, guys, but like you just had this warmth, you know? You just had this um again like a support role. Like you're always there to help out, you know? And I really appreciate that from you and just hearing your story. I think people really enjoy it for sure, because you have a very fair, very grateful, very nuanced approach to this whole thing, which I think is great. And it's, I think, focused on people and their well-being, you know, and what they can contribute and what how other people can just contextualize their processes and their situations, you know. So I really appreciate it, man. And I don't want to cut you off at all. If you have more, like I we can keep going, but
That's
but
okay. We could do it another time.
yeah.
But yeah, th this is the thing. I mean, Corinthians, right?
Hmm.
And I think LaRouche had it. There were times, right? There were times when you felt that he had this elevated, I would call it spiritual quality about him.
Hmm.
And it was beautiful. And that's what kept me in, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and then like, yeah, I think who is Jessica was saying that the other side, there's a meanness that we all saw at times from a variety of people.
Hmm.
Uh, I probably had it too from time to time. So we just have to be honest with ourselves, you know?
Hmm.
We didn't know what we were doing all the time.
Yeah.
Uh, but you know, forgiveness, come on. I mean, these are basic things. You don't have to be a Christian.
Hmm. No, I think it's, you know, it and it applies in so many ways, right? Like us forgiving other people for, you know, like they were in terrible situations. Like maybe I've been in offices where like maybe the leadership had some toxic qualities, right? I can, you know, as someone who hopes to have matured since then, right, a decade later, and I can see them and I can see their situation and see the kinds of pressures they were under and the lack of training or whatever, and say, okay, like I forgive them for this behavior, right? Because I've been in
Yeah,
those
yeah, yeah.
situations too and made similar mistakes, and like you hope that others can forgive you, and so that's, I mean, it is a Christian concept of forgiveness, at least the one I'm familiar with about, you know, forgive them their trespasses is you're forgiven for yours, right? And that's sort of the golden rule, and I think it works. And so that's, I think it's a really beautiful thing. And then at the same time, forgiving yourself, I think is huge for a lot of people. Forgiving yourself for like what you think are your shortcomings or what you think, you know, maybe, you know, people can be jerks, and like I've tried to reach out and ask forgiveness for people I felt I'd wronged during my time in the organization, and so far everyone has been forgiving, you know, which is great. It's just like that little thing in the back of your head, just like throw it away, you know, or
Yeah, yeah.
not throw it away, incorporate it and grow from it, you know, and see, okay, we're different people. We're mature, hopefully. We're more mature. We're more emotionally open. And I think it's great. I think it's great. I think what you're bringing to the table is crucial for a lot of people.
Good.
So I'm really, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
I'm very
yeah.
grateful. I'm very grateful for you, Mark. Right? I'm very
I'm grateful
grateful.
for you, Spencer.
Thanks,
And
man.
look, honestly, if anyone else had done this, I don't know. I think your fate has chosen the perfect person for this position, for this job, because I think most people trust you.
Thanks,
And
man.
if they don't, then they get their head in their ass and they have to check in with their heart a little bit. You know, like who do you trust, man? Like how
Yeah, if you
some of
don't,
this stuff just gets so crazy. Like how do you, you know,
sure.
how do you judge a character?
I forget if I brought this up in the last episode, but this Louis C.K. has this bit where he's walking down the street in New York City, and this elderly woman collapses, and there's like this group of people huddled around, and he's like looking around, and he's like, "All right, damn it, I'll do it. Like you guys are gonna do it, fine, I'll do it." And he goes, "Yeah, you know," and I helped her up, and we became lifelong friends, and whatever, it doesn't matter. But no, it's I felt I had a way to do it that was going to that people were going to trust, you know. And I just saw a path, and I saw some level of utility, and I was like, I don't know. And I, you know, you saw the first one was just my Navy buddy. Like that was just laying out the problem, and then Joanne was like, Joanne is courageous and she'll come on and she'll be
Yeah,
Joanne.
yeah, yeah.
It'll be beautiful. And that's exactly what
That's
she
great.
did. Yeah. And
And
then it's,
she's so sweet and optimistic too. I mean, like you just see
yeah,
people moving on, people moving on and not always becoming degenerate. Like this idea that once you leave the movement, oh man, like
sure.
give them 5 weeks and they're gonna be like
Shooting up
doing
ketamine.
orgies
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah.
Ketamine field orgies. Yeah.
Maybe some people actually, but most of us, I mean, I'm so like again, I'm so grateful. I mean, I never would have been able to be a good husband, I don't think.
Mm,
And now I feel like I could be. Like I had to go through 9 years of virtual celibacy, which was very painful at times. I mean,
hmm
this person, Michael, that I mentioned earlier, he knows he was basically my psychotherapist for years.
Yeah. Nice.
And others, a lot of
Sure.
people were my psychotherapists because I would get melancholy as hell about this, like loneliness. Oh, when am I never me? Oh, how
Yeah,
am I
sure.
ever going to be okay?
Sure. It's a natural thing. It's
Along
a
with,
natural thing. Yeah.
yeah, and I wasn't alone because I think there was a lot of single men, and it was very hard to connect in some ways because, anyway, this is a whole different topic. We can talk about
Sure.
this another time,
Sure.
but I don't even want to go there. But back to the sympathy for the leaders. There was one time. There's one person who's very, very special to me, which is Phil.
hmm
And I mean, that guy could give a class on any topic, and it was just he just drew the paradoxes right out of the air, like unbelievable
hmm
mind, and really a strategic person, like very much like what I imagine Abraham Lincoln to be like in
hmm
demeanor and personality and curiosity. And I wasn't particularly close with any of the NCs in LA. I mean,
hmm
I wasn't really like the teacher's pet that would go hang out in the office or anything like that. But you know, I love this man. Uh, and one time I went downstairs into where the phone team was working,
hmm
and he was whipping them like slaves. It was brutal.
hmm
It was brutal. And it was like a shock. He was swearing at them. He was screaming at them. It was like a temper tantrum.
Wow.
And you know, I bet there were times when Abraham Lincoln was doing that to his generals.
Mm.
Like it's just pressure, man. Leadership is hard.
Sure.
And you're looking at we don't reach this goal because here's a guy he loved the youth.
hmm
And he knew that we needed to be able to support this thing or it was going to die.
Yeah.
And, this was the way that the thing was set up. It was not ideal. You had people who were in their 50s and 60s or whatever down there, basically in the coal mine all day,
hmm
making phone calls. Like, I don't know what it was like down there, but I think it was really, really hard probably
hmm
for a lot of years and making a lot of sacrifice. And we were basically not even interacting with them as
Yeah.
youth members. And that's a cognitive dissonance too.
hmm
When you're somebody, I mean, I try to imagine myself as Phil, trying to hold in my, I only have one brain. I have to hold these two disparate ideas. One is I've got this precious golden egg that I need to keep alive. And then I've got these other people who are my peers who rely on me for leadership, and I need them to do this work now.
Sure.
And we can't be cute and we can't be cuddly and we can't care about feelings and we can't care about like it's war,
Sure.
it's very much like war.
Sure.
And also from another point of view, it's very much like a cult, right? So it's
It's incredibly
but
nuanced.
like
Yeah.
my argument is like a lot of things in life are like a cult. I've worked in a lot of places, there's toxic work environments, there's toxic family environments, there's toxic school environments, there's toxic friend environments.
Sure.
Um, and the idea that only in I don't know, I just think the predicates for identifying cults are sometimes very shallow, you know,
Sure. Sure.
because it's not necessarily those predicates that make it bad. I mean, if you were to go back, if you were to go back and look at Jesus and the apostles and stuff, you'd probably say, well, that was a cult. Like,
Hmm.
but it was a cult of love, so it's still better than the all the not cult where everyone is like running around worshiping money or worshiping
Fire.
pleasure or
Yeah.
worshiping iron. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
So what are we? This is what I mean by like, what do you trust? What's true? Like Sky said once, how do you know what's true?
Hmm.
And I think this project, Spencer, has a lot of potential because I think one thing that really resonated with me, you said it in prior podcasts, is like probably if if the ideas of the movement are going to have the greatest chance of survival in the future, it's not necessarily going to be only from the people who are actively pursuing it in the two surviving movements.
Sure.
It's probably going to be in some distillation. And this is how history is wild, right? It merges.
Hmm.
I mean, you could very well have like a renaissance of these Monge brigades could be 20 years from now from a person who has no contact with any movements, but just like picked up a book
Sure.
or watched a video, or like it could just be some weird hot shot thing where some person who has all the qualities at the right time creates it. And they're going to be looking for resources and they're going to be looking for truth with respect to what happened actually.
Hmm.
And I like the fact that what you're saying is right on. If you look at the Wikipedia, it's so impossible to figure out what the hell is actually going on.
Yeah. It's
And then
nothing.
if you look at the LaRouche material, you get one side of the story, but those are from the people who are on the inside. A lot of
Hmm.
people, hey, this movement was accused of being a cult, so we can't take that at face value either.
Sure.
And so who do you trust? So like finding this impartiality, getting the experiences on record of it's different than just going through the archives of EIR or or some other thing which a historian would later do.
Yeah.
It could be it could be an important part of the whole process, the whole puzzle. And so I want to put my voice out there. It's less critical than some others. Um, I want to just say that I gained a lot from my time there. I don't. Sometimes I'm like, I wish I had a better resume, but generally, I don't regret my time there at all. And many of the best people. If I had to say, like, what are the top 20 teachers I've had in my life, like 19 of them are from the movement, and many of them are peers of mine. They're not even
Yeah.
older. Uh, what are the most intelligent people I've met in my life? Top
Hmm.
10, probably 9 or 10 out of the top 10.
Yeah.
It's just crazy to throw out the baby with the bathwater. It's crazy to do that.
It's a Kepler quote too.
What?
Yeah, he wrote a book called Tertius Interveniens, the third party intervenes. I lent my copy to a friend of ours that you mentioned earlier in this show, and she's I don't know, either she still has it or she lost it, but it was good. No, he's talking about astrology and
Hmm.
is astrology crazy or does it have value? And that's where the first coining of that term, you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater because he talks about all these different examples about how astrology can has some basis and can be useful to us. So that's anyway, a little book there. But you reminded me too, um, one part of the written project, soon to be getting into better gears, is a section on vignettes, which I've told you about before. But I think I would love for you to write a couple or several for because you have such a warm view of others, right? And I want it to be hot. I don't want it to like dig into people or something. This person did this. It's meant to be like,
No, I really don't have anything negative to say about anybody.
yeah,
I mean, almost nobody. There are one or two people that I didn't like that much because I thought that they were more hurtful and spiteful than perhaps loving.
sure.
But man, that 95% of the people I have nothing but love for.
Yeah, and it's so
Yeah.
I'm inviting people to write. biographical vignettes of other members
Mm.
because I want people to, we'll have the narrative in the book, we'll have the narrative, right? In the video, obviously, this process, we have the interviews. We'll have the narrative of like the events and people's experiences, but then to show like the people that made it up, the people that comprise this movement. It's such a wonderful cast. Like it'd be maybe one of the most interesting sections of the whole thing, I think. Like, oh, any one of the ones you talked about, like, man, that was an interesting person. He had an interesting life, and here's how I knew him or her, etc. So I think it'd be fun. So that's for everyone else as well. People tuning in. You can all have the Substack linked in the description, of course, or you can email me. I always post my email. And I will get approval from people to include those because I don't want to air their stuff. Otherwise, it'll be like a pseudonym or something. But yeah, man, I think, do you have any closing thoughts? I think we've come to a good arc here, I think. You tell me
No,
what you think. You're also producer and media guy.
oh, not really. No, but thank you though. Um, no, I just you know, again, just begging for not begging, but asking for forgiveness for those who I may have contributed to harm in any way, in any way. Even if I snaked I snaked your female contact, or I hit on your wife, or like whatever number of things that it could have been, because I was a dog in a lot of ways. No, but yeah, just nothing but love. That's all. Yeah.
Awesome, man.
And if you're out there and you're suffering and you're trying to find meaning in your life again as well, if you just want someone to talk to and gripe to, you can talk to me as well. I mean, Spencer, but I also I'm somebody that is happy to speak to you. If your purpose is just to gripe, then maybe not. But if your purpose is to find uh, a a way to move forward, then I would love to speak with you. Yeah.
Awesome.
And if you just want to reconnect, I would love to reconnect.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Awesome, man. Well,
So you can join this Discord. I don't know.
yeah. Join the Discord. Yeah, yeah. No, I haven't said that here. We have a Discord as well. If you're not on my other social media, Discord of members that want to reconnect. And there's some discussion there on the writing project and the vignettes and the where are they now section. Like where did you end up? What's your story after you left? Because that's interesting too. So yeah, remember. Well, Mark, again, thank you so much.
Thanks, man.
I knew you're gonna have such a great take. I didn't know what it was, but it ended up being even better than I thought. So gratitude,
Ah, my
100%,
pleasure.
100%. I think it's gonna provide a lot of value to people. So thank you so much, Mark.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, Spen. We'll
All
we'll
right.
stay in touch.